to come in. And so I believe that it is possible that our churches can start giving hope again, presenting a real, relevant gospel that changes lives and is not afraid to change methods. Because we want to see people passionately worshiping, don't we? We want to see people getting baptized and reaching their full God-given potential. That's what we want to see. And so, in your notes, there's no good reason for churches to be dying and drying up in this age. How do I know? Because I read the Bible. I know how the Bible ends. And I know that in Luke chapter 1:37, for nothing is impossible with God. 1 Corinthians 15:57, but thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. That the gates of hell will not prevail against His church. That Jesus, in Matthew chapter 19:26, that He looked at them intently and He says, humanly speaking, it is impossible. But with God, everything is possible. Everything. Well, God must not have seen our church situation. Oh, He did. And He does. And He's got a plan. It might not be your plan or my plan or our exact prescription of what we'd like to see happen. But here's what I know about His plan. He wants to see your church grow and flourish. He wants to see more people come to Christ and fewer people get turned off. Amen. He wants to see incredible, abundantly, immeasurably, more than we could ever ask or imagine happen in our communities. And in our homes, and in our families, and in our churches. But the only way that we can see that happen is if we change. If we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting what we've always gotten. And you can have change without real growth. You know, we can change for the sake of change. We can try different things, and change is not going to guarantee growth. But you cannot have real growth, in your notes, without change. You can't have real growth unless something changes. The definition of insanity is doing the same old thing and expecting different results. We need change. Now, this is important to remember. And this is something that you can take home with you, and you can take to bed with you. You can take it to the bank. You can just know this is true. Those who fight change the most, those who are so opposed to every change, they end up changing more. The people who fight it the most change more than anyone else. Well, you haven't met the people that fight change in my church then, because they're never going to change. You know what? When the church closes and we can't do hymns at all, let alone hymns the way they wanted them, at the volume they wanted them, at the time they wanted them, everything changes. You know, we've got to be open to seeing what God might want to do, that He might want to do what He says in His Word, a new thing. That He might want to do something different, something new. We'll never, ever change the message. But we must constantly be open to changing the methods. So what can we change? What can we do to change the situation? What are these simple steps that I saw happen in the Miramichi that honestly I believe could happen in no matter what your situation is, that they could happen in this pastor's situation that I was praying with a few weeks ago? Number one is we could change the atmosphere. It's the first thing that I tried to address when I went to Newcastle United Baptist Church. There was nothing wrong with the atmosphere. Don't get me wrong. The guy who came before me was, probably more spiritual than me. I think he was a better pastor than me. I love the guy. He set me up for great success. He was great. But it was time for a change in the atmosphere in in the room. Because here's what I mean by atmosphere. Church ought to feel more like a celebration than a ceremony. If you look at the Bible and you look at what the New Testament church felt like, it felt more like a celebration, a coming together, a gathering in the temple courts. It was a more celebratory time rather than a ceremonial time. I have a friend who's a pastor who I chat with him every once in a while. We have a great conversation. I went to his church a couple of years ago, and he stood up behind the pulpit, and I thought, who is that guy? He's swallowed the communion table. Like he sounds totally different. He's put on his preacher voice, his church voice, his formal voice. Man, that's ceremonial. That's not celebrational. The church ought to feel more like a celebration and less like a ceremony. That it should feel more like the wedding reception and less like a funeral. But if you think about it, and if you look around the room next Sunday, a lot of our churches, you'd think you were at a funeral. And we wonder, why isn't there more people coming? Well, you think about when people do come. When do the most people come to your church? They come for funerals? When it's really sad sometimes. That they come for wedding ceremonies in the church that are very formal. When I walk in with the grooms and we're all standing at the front, oftentimes there's this hush in the room, a holy hush that nobody's talking, people are whispering. But it's this formal state. Everybody's all dressed to the nines. It's this big deal. And then you go to the reception a few hours later and you think, were those the same people? I mean, their ties are loosened and they're relaxed, they're laughing, they're loud, they're telling stories. They look like they're actually enjoying themselves. And here's what I've noticed now that society does what it wants, when it wants, where it wants, is fewer and fewer people are coming to the ceremony and they're just showing up for the reception. And the same thing is happening at funerals. Fewer and fewer people are showing up for the funeral service, and they're going to the visiting hours. And you know when else they come to church? They come at Christmas. When we're all stiff and starchy with the candles up at the front, and we've got to be a little more careful today because we don't want to burn the place down, and we're all dressed up because this is the birth of Jesus, which is great and all, but we make those our most formal services. And then Easter, where we crucify a guy, and it's pretty sad and somber, and I'm all for the work of the cross. I wouldn't be here without the work of the cross, but yet think about it for a second. If the only time you come to church is for a wedding ceremony and a funeral and Christmas time, of course, and Easter, when they're talking about the torture, and at both those times, Christmas and Easter, we put on an extra push to get them saved. We only get them here twice a year. Let's get them saved. So we oftentimes sing an extra few verses of the invitational. We come on a little stronger because the room's full. So let's get them. Let's make hay while the sun shines. And all I'm saying is, no wonder people don't come back to church. It's sad. It's depressing. It's stiff. It's starchy. Doctors don't even wear white coats anymore. And we're still getting all dressed up. You don't know who the nurse is at the hospital because our society has gone all casual, right? But at Christmas and Easter and weddings and funerals, if that's your only exposure to the church, you think, man, the church is uptight and depressing. And then you've got these people standing up front who, with all the goodness out of their hearts, they're worshiping, but they look like they're miserable. Because they think they only communicate with their words. They're only communicating verbally, but they're communicating non-verbally too. And man, I think we should have the same criteria for if you get to sing. You got to be able to sing. You got to have some ability there. They shouldn't let me sing. But there should also be a criteria for your face. That you should be able to look happy at some time. That when you sing about blessed assurance, that you're singing, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Not blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. It's the gospel according to Kevin. Yeah. And truly, there's a few simple things that we can do to change this atmosphere. When you start thinking about making your church feel a little more like a wedding reception rather than a funeral, there's some changes that come to play. And I'm going to just highlight a few of them. But you keep in mind here, so that you don't think I'm leading you down the garden path, and I'm not saying to change the message. You give the invitation, you invite people to Christ. In fact, I'm saying to do those things. But I'm also saying that it's time to change the atmosphere. That's a method, not the message. And in fact, the message might actually get heard if we could change this atmosphere. And so the atmosphere in your church starts outside your church. In the parking lot or outside the front doors. You think about it for a second. If you're in a little country church and there's a wooden door there and it's a big white door, what a different feel to walk up to a closed wooden door and have to open that than if there's somebody standing on the outside saying, "Hey, I'm so glad to see you. Come on up. Come on in. Let me get the door for you." You know, that changes your feel of the place. That changes your conversation when you walk through. Because you now know, oh, I must be allowed to respond to people. This is not a funeral. I don't have to just nod at people. But I can actually speak to people. I can say, "Hey, well, it's good to see you too. I haven't seen you all week. It's great to be back." And you know, back in the 1980s, we learned about greeters, right? And so we've propped people at the door forevermore that just kind of go like this, and because we learned that that's what you're supposed to do, is have two people standing at the door. We've got everybody's got their list, and everybody wants to be. That's how you now get involved with church, is you greet. I greet. I can't do anything else. I can't go with the kids because I'm greeting, and really you're not greeting. You're waving your hand, right? But here's what we need to do. We need to transfer the formality of the 80s of having greeters at the door to actually looking people in the eye and saying, "Good morning, I am so glad to see you. I'm glad you came today. How was your week?" And it's not just the good morning, they told me to say good morning, they told me to say good morning. It's, "Hey, what happened with your cat there last week? You know, you were telling me," and you don't have to get into a whole conversation, but it's a little more personal. And hey, "Hey, is this your first time?" Or, "Hey, I haven't noticed you here before." Or, here's a safer question in a larger church: "How long have you been coming?" And engaging just a little bit instead of the robot. And so if you start outside your building and you look alive and you look alert and you actually say to people, "Come on in. Oh, we're in for a great time today. Oh, pastor says he's got a great service. Oh, today it's about this." And, "Oh, come on in. Come on up those stairs. Careful, they're a little slippy at the bottom. Come on right up." And we start actually engaging and talking to people before they ever get in the door. And then they walk through the door and there's somebody else not just going like this, but they hand them a bulletin that sometime between 1970 and 2015 has changed. Because what message are you sending with whatever you're handing out in your church? Now, I haven't seen any of your church bulletins. They could be better than mine. But I've been in a lot of churches where they found some clip art. Somebody did a pencil drawing of the front of their church, and it's on the front of their bulletin, and it shall not be moved. And so where else would you go on God's green earth, aside from the church, to get something that looks like what you're handing out on Sunday? I hope that you can get it at the mall. I hope you can get it everywhere. Some of you are saying, "Well, we just don't have money to do that." You have no idea because you've never checked how much it costs. You've just bought into that excuse. Because I've learned that there's many things that you can do that are actually cheaper than running it through the old photocopier the old way, doing it that other way, and it looks much better. So we got to evaluate our greeting, because that affects the atmosphere. And what we hand people when they walk through the door. And then the lighting. Are the bright spots bright? And are the places that are supposed to be warmer and more inviting? And that are they